November 8th, Ukrainian ballistic missiles strike Moscow.
Shrapnel flew everywhere.
The third phase of the special operation Spiderweb.
That's a fire.
Russian Navy generals are being blown up.
Are you filming? Yeah. Unbelievable. Whoa, holy crap. That's insane.
FSB officers' cars are exploding in Moscow. Oh, it's getting bigger and bigger. They should have moved the car away over there. Moscow airports are closed. Sabotage and gunfire near the Kremlin. Muscovites are in panic. Evacuation has begun.
What's going on right now? The police officers, the cops are actually running away. Can you believe it?
The rockets just keep coming. Boom. That's an explosion. Bada boom!
This is seriously fucked right now.
The SBU is preparing new acts of sabotage on Russian territory.
Girls, honestly, we're screwed right now.
Moscow, St. Petersburg, get ready to evacuate.
3 hours and 46 minutes or something like that. The sirens started blaring. Thank you to our dear authorities for our cloudless life.
Breaking news, friends. Sabotage, gunfire in the Kremlin, conspirators caught, Moscow airports closed. Ukrainian ballistic missiles and Western rockets are heading for Moscow.
There, no panic, son.
Petersburg, Moscow, the Kremlin, get ready. We'll discuss all this with top analyst Alexander Demchenko right now. There's constant chaos at Moscow airports because here's an infographic of Moscow airport closures over the past 6 days. It's just a total disaster. Vnukovo was closed 9 times, Sheremetyevo 4 times, and Domodedovo and Zhukovsky 20 times each. Indeed, Muscovites are in a panic. How do you assess the prospect of TAURUS missiles targeting Moscow, the Kremlin, Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Sheremetyevo?
I think that German missiles, and not only German ones, are flying toward Moscow and St. Petersburg, toward the major cities of the Russian Federation. I think the area near the Russian General Staff on Frunzinskaya, which is under Lyarbata, will go up in flames. I think other important locations will also catch fire. The same Red Post Office, which for some reason Putin and his entire entourage have been talking about lately. Why do we have to talk about this, Dasha? Because a real turning point has occurred. This is a turning point. This is a new phase of the war, a new stage. Everyone has perfectly understood that Putin is not just crazy, as Donald Trump said, but that Putin has no intention of backing down and only plans to escalate the situation, escalating it every single day. That's why I assume that the Germans, French, British, and Americans, on top of everything, have lost their patience and given Ukraine permission to strike Russia with anything possible. And when they gave this permission, they initially expected that the strikes would be specifically on the territory of Moscow. It is likely that a decision has been made in Europe to destroy and sabotage everything possible in Russia, especially in the capital, because they believe that if the strikes are massive, if they rain down across Moscow, this will somehow change the course of the war, affect Muscovites, make the capital groan, and perhaps prompt the Russian elite to wake up a bit and maybe take a closer look at what Vladimir Putin is actually doing and whether this war is really necessary or not. Let's not rule out a strike on Rubliovka either, because if something is launched toward Moscow, whether it reaches its target or not, Rubliovka is on the way, along with other elite cottages and settlements. So anything can happen. There could even be a strike on Rubliovka in the near future. We can't rule that out either. But what's important here is something else. It's clear that if there are massive missile strikes, and we know that Russians like to shoot down drones and missiles even over kindergartens. Just look, recently a passenger plane was almost shot down by mistake. A passenger plane was flying by, they fired at it, almost shot it down. Fortunately, everyone survived and nothing happened. Well, for them, that's a good thing, obviously. Just recently, someone shot at Putin. You see, on one hand, they shoot at the passenger plane. Now they're shooting at Putin. And who passed on the logistics of Vladimir Putin's route? Then we ourselves have to say that there are conspirators in the Kremlin, that there is a group among Putin's security from the FSO, among the Chekists at Lubyanka, the security service, yes, Putin's security, among the elite close to Putin, who want him dead, who secretly passed the coordinates to Ukraine. Moreover, there is another very important point that we know. We know, as reported just recently by the British publication The Economist, that Ukraine and algorithms have been embedded in drones for Ukraine and its allies, just as Russia is now programming drones. So, as I understand it, there are engineers at Russian defense enterprises who are against the war, who take and send embedding Enigma-like codes and algorithms into the drones, modern ones, you see, sending them out just like Putin does with drones. In essence, we are witnessing a massive act of sabotage within Russia itself. Next, I just look at the news. In the Belgorod region, a railway has been destroyed, a huge stretch of track. In the Tula region, a railway has also been destroyed today, right at this very moment, a section of track. Because this is the connection to the Kursk region, specifically the Tula-Kursk route. This is, of course, a direct link to the border area. In other words, this is about minimizing and neutralizing any further advances in the Kharkiv direction and accordingly in the Sumy direction. Essentially, what we're seeing now is the beginning of a series of large-scale, massive sabotage operations on the territory of the Russian Federation, starting from the border regions and moving toward Moscow in order to completely neutralize any of Putin's capabilities and destroy any remaining margin of safety. And I am confident that the partisan movement, which was created both before the war and during the last 3.5 years of this large-scale war, is operating and doing so very cohesively. Because if there are massive explosions targeting railways and tracks in the Russian Federation, then the offensive and military operations will simply grind to a halt. This has already happened in history, in African countries. A massive railway attack, explosions on the railroads. And this has always had a very significant impact on the course of military operations and on the progress of offensives. A very strong impact. That's why German missiles, and not just German ones, we know that everyone has given permission, the French, the British, and even Trump has turned a blind eye to it, will fly over Russia, including over Moscow and St. Petersburg. This will significantly change the war and alter the capital's attitude toward this war. I think Muscovites are not like people from Rostov. They're not Uyghurs. You see, they're not Uyghurs, not Bashkirs, sorry, not all the other guys. These are people who will definitely start to tremble, who will clearly look and wonder, what is Putin doing? And I think this will also make the inner Kremlin, the Russian elite, very nervous. They're already nervous because Putin, Shoigu says he's cold and lonely. Patrushev has been silent lately. Medvedev practically never puts down his glass together with Gerasimov. Probably drinking with Mashka Sagarova, the three of them. This will have an impact. Massive sabotage in the near future will affect the course of the war. As I've been saying for many weeks now, we're entering a new phase in this war. When Trump's peace initiative, called Minsk III, the freezing of the war, was nullified, today Russia is convening a Security Council meeting to discuss how the West is disrupting peace negotiations. Russia is such a peace-loving agent. You see, Russia is trying to achieve peace, but the West keeps sabotaging everything. But in reality, we all understand perfectly well that Putin has no intention of making peace. He's not going to offer any real plan to resolve this war, the hostilities, or anything else. This will be a disruption, and a new phase of the war is beginning where everyone now realizes and accepts that there will be no resolution, that this will drag on for years, and that the stakes need to be raised significantly in order to
bring the ruthless Kremlin dictator to heel. Bring the Kremlin dictator to heel. It'll be a different story for Muscovites and people in St. Petersburg when TAURUS missiles start flying toward the two capitals of the Russian Federation, so to speak. Sasha, regarding what you said, indeed, Merz mentioned that this will last a long time, but what about Trump's mood? While Trump made what I consider a very mild comment about Putin, calling him crazy, he said he was crazy, yes, but nothing followed after that. Then I read in the Wall Street Journal, your post, and the New York Times writes that Trump might this week impose sanctions, or he might not impose them. Let's talk about this.
He might impose them, but not the ones people expected. Look, Dasha, it's all very simple here. If the Americans suddenly find some courage and impose 500% tariffs on Russian oil, petroleum products, gas, and uranium, the Russian economy would find itself under an embargo, completely shut off. Then we would be talking about Russia only being able to fight for another month or two. In other words, this war would end quickly. It could even end tomorrow if Putin were to face this. But they aren't willing to do that. Lindsey Graham can come to Istanbul, he can leave Istanbul, he can shout, he can do whatever he wants. Trump won't do it. All right, maybe he'll introduce a package of 17,000 sanctions or some other package. It doesn't matter at all. It makes no difference whatsoever. That won't stop Vladimir Putin. There are many ways to restrain Vladimir Putin. Both Europe and America have these means. and a real sanctions mechanism with these tariffs, with a complete oil embargo, and by driving down oil prices directly. Of course, this also means blocking certain straits. This means negotiating with Turkey so that no components are supplied to the Russian Federation and no goods are delivered, not through Central Asian countries, not through Turkey. It will, of course, be more complicated with China, but there are other countries where dual-use and non-dual-use goods are shipped. There are plenty of opportunities to really hit Russia, but they are not doing it, even though they themselves are preparing for war. I mean, the Europeans, the Poles are preparing for war very seriously, and so on. Right now, a lot of people are worried about what will happen in Belarus. Never mind Trump. With Trump, everything is clear. Trump is more concerned with things like how, during a golf outing, a goose bit his special envoy Litkov on the balls, and then he posted that photo. Instead of discussing what is really happening with Putin and why he can't manage to reach an agreement with him. That's what he doesn't talk about. Putin has lost his mind. All right, he's lost his mind. So what next? Everyone understands this. Everyone has known it for a long time. Everyone knows it's impossible to negotiate with him. So what now? And yet no steps have been taken. So what were we told next? We were told that if nothing works out this week and Trump imposes sanctions and they don't work, because once again, they'll be toothless, then Trump will walk away from the negotiations. Well, that's exactly what the two of them want. Trump wants to get as far away as possible. Because he doesn't want to be seen as a loser or a failure. He doesn't want, figuratively speaking, to end up with a second Afghanistan for himself, like how Biden fled from Afghanistan. He doesn't want that kind of situation for himself on a global scale. And this would be an even worse situation for America. And Putin wants Trump to walk away so that America doesn't help in any way. Neither Ukraine nor Europe, so that the situation becomes even more complicated. Because Putin believes that then he'll definitely tighten the screws on everything. He'll definitely push everything through and pressure everyone. I'm very concerned about what's happening now in the north and what will happen. I mean, the Zapad 2025 military exercises on the territory of Belarus. They had a phone call, Putin and Lukashenko, literally yesterday. He thanked him for the 1,000 for 1,000 exchange that Lukashenko organized on the border with Ukraine. It's all nonsense. What it's really about is putting pressure on Lukashenko and probably sending as many of their military groups as possible into Belarus. And then we'll see how things play out. They could even attack Kyiv or Chernihiv from the north. No one is ruling out such a threat. I think that after February 2022, you'd have to be completely blind or deaf not to understand that this threat is real, that Putin could very well try this again. Last time his blitzkrieg failed. Why do we think that this time he wouldn't want to try another blitzkrieg, correcting some mistakes, working things out? But on the other hand, of course, no one is ruling out further provocations from Belarusian territory against Lithuania or other Baltic countries or Poland. The Poles are preparing very seriously, and so are the Lithuanians. And in fact, we have to acknowledge one thing together. Europe has finally switched to a wartime footing. Europe is now in a state of war, and sooner or later a big war will break out. And we will still see European fighter jets bombing Moscow and other major cities of the Russian Federation because this confrontation is inevitable. Putin cannot take a step back. If he does, his own people will simply remove him. He cannot do it. And the Europeans cannot surrender because they understand what a colossal threat it would be for them if Putin occupies all of Ukraine. And he wants to occupy Ukraine. Trump has said this, Medvedev has said this, and even Putin himself has essentially said the same thing.
Sasha, can Graham go along with Blumenthal? In other words, can the Senate, in effect, go against the administration's policy, break through Trump's veto, and by majority vote pass a bill that would become a law imposing hellish sanctions on the Russian Federation?
They can. But they really want to get something from the White House. They really want to get some contracts. They really want to get some preferences for their firms and companies. They also really want to make money on something, and so on. If I remember correctly, Graham has been introducing hellish sanctions against Russia for many, many years now, about 7 years. Where are these hellish sanctions? This is not the first bill authored by Graham. When Russia is threatened with hellish sanctions, but there are no hellish sanctions, not from Graham nor from anyone else. They come up with one package after another. I've come to a thought, a very important one, it seems to me. What if these guys had given everything to Ukraine at the beginning of 2023, imposed hellish sanctions against Putin, and allowed them to strike with long-range missiles, even ATACMS back then? If they had helped Ukraine with drone production, Russia would have already lost by now and would be down for the count. And we would be talking about what is happening in Russia, how it is being restructured, how it is falling apart, how the struggle among the elites is unfolding, how the empire is collapsing. But that didn't happen. Not during Prigozhin's mutiny, not amid the confusion and turmoil among the elites after the failed blitzkrieg, not against the backdrop of the tightening of sanctions policy, the first blows of sanctions against Putin. Nothing happened. It wasn't Ukraine that missed the moment. Obviously, Ukraine couldn't have produced such a quantity of missiles, shells, ammunition, and so on. It's simply the West, by and large, that was cowardly and continues to be cowardly. Everything that's happening now, all this blood, all the blame, apart from Putin, because Putin is certainly guilty. Putin is a murderer in this sense. Yes, he kills people. Russians are killing people. They occupy territory, they destroy homes, they rape, they loot, they abduct children. But those comrades who didn't help all this time, who blocked aid and support, this is also the doing of Trump and his team back then in the US Congress, who were constantly delaying the provision of ammunition to Ukraine. They were wavering. Remember the Scholz government. Should we give TAURUS missiles or not? Should we give TAURUS or not? And what about tanks? Should we give Leopard tanks or not? And so on and so forth. While they were hesitating, Putin increased both the number of drones and the number of missiles, made deals with the Iranians, got North Korean shells, artillery, and even sent North Koreans, these dogs, to fight against Ukraine. That's why we have the situation we have now. And this turning point in the war should have started much, much earlier. Let's put it that way, much earlier. It's only happening now. But only now is Europe starting to catch up. And I have a big question. Will it actually catch up?
The fact that Merz came out and said that this war will last a very, very long time means that Europe has officially admitted its own powerlessness against Russia. Because if Europe were to impose the sanctions that actually need to be imposed right now, yes, disconnecting everything from SWIFT, embargoes on oil, gas, uranium, gold, and other things. Remember what Chichvakin said, that if Europe imposes a certain package, then again, at that point, Russia would simply collapse. Its economy would collapse. But Europe didn't do that. And Merz is officially admitting their own helplessness, like, we can't do anything, so Russia will keep fighting Ukraine, attacking Ukraine for many, many more years.
I don't know, maybe Merz is or isn't. He's not as impotent as, for example, Scholz. You see what I mean? Yeah, there's really no need to overthink this. All you really need to do is take two actions. Of course, you could do a lot more, but you need to do these two things. Shut down the Danish Straits, so that no Russian ships, neither shadow nor otherwise, can navigate in any direction selling this semi-legal oil. That's the first thing. That would practically bring everything in Russia to a halt. Just like that. Everything would simply come to a standstill. And second, blockade Kaliningrad, an economic blockade of Kaliningrad and a military blockade of Kaliningrad. And what will Putin do? Will he go up against NATO with war? Will he go after the Finns? Will he move on Poland? What will he do now when all his forces are concentrated on Ukraine? If these things happened, he would surrender. Because the loss of Kaliningrad, which was handed over to his first and only wife, who now goes by the surname Okeratina, but back then was Putin, Lyudmila, she currently oversees the Kaliningrad region. That would be a major blow to him. A big one. Kaliningrad is not Rostov. It's an important center for Russia. It's a separate concentration of troops, it's a military grouping, and so on. It would be a colossal defeat if the Baltic fleet were forced to head towards St. Petersburg. It would be a colossal defeat if the entire region were blockaded and all routes for delivering goods, any goods, humanitarian or otherwise, were completely cut off. And that's it. And the Danish Strait would be closed. That would be enough to make him back down, drop all his ultimatums, and sign a peace agreement. Yes, that peace agreement would last for 3 or 4 years. But that's a pause that absolutely everyone would need in this situation. Ukraine and the West included. Not just Russia. And how
is that
not happening?
Residents of the Suwalki corridor are leaving in fear of a Russian invasion, writes Bild. Amid rising tensions, residents of the strategically important Suwalki corridor have begun to leave the region en masse. This was reported by the German newspaper Bild. It is noted that this narrow strip of land, 65 kilometers between Poland and Lithuania, which separates Belarus and Kaliningrad, is a vulnerable point in NATO's defense. And military experts believe that in the event of a conflict, the armed forces could strike from both sides. Russian artillery, capable of striking at distances of more than 30 kilometers, covers the entire Suwalki corridor. What do you say to that?
I would ask, where is the army? Where is their unified army that they keep talking about? All right, there is no unified army. They don't even want to send peacekeeping forces and contingents to Ukrainian Lviv. They're afraid, they're cowards, to Odessa and so on. All right, but where is the army? The British, the French, the German? Where are the Swedish systems, the fighter jets, the artillery? Where is the Finnish artillery there? Where is the defense? To even, in general, neutralize any threat from Russia and Belarus. So there are a huge number of questions. They just say, well, fine, let's evacuate people, but what next? It's clear that this is the road to Kaliningrad, a land corridor to Kaliningrad. But it's a narrow strip that could separate the Baltic countries from Poland, obviously cut them off. But this is a strip that is extremely vulnerable, even in the event of an advance by Russian troops. And it's not for nothing that Sweden was made a party, a NATO member, and so on. Gotland Island, and so on and so forth. None of this happened by accident. But that's still not enough right now. You see, we can just express our outrage. We can discuss it. These are obvious things.
Of course.
The question is that now a new stage of the war is beginning, a new phase of the war. What happens next? For Ukraine, it's clear what comes next. This is going to be a long war. Putin doesn't want to make peace until he starts having problems with the economy, first with human resources, second and directly in military terms, third. He will keep going. His economy will likely collapse by the end of this year. Everyone there is already saying there will be a recession, there will be a downturn. They'll have to do something about it. This will affect the defense industry. We'll see what happens with oil prices. Most likely they will also collapse in the near future, or at least in the relatively near future. All of this, one way or another, will also affect the course of military operations, the fighting itself. But this takes time. We have to find a way to use it. Look, I actually view all these things optimistically. Why? Because considering that the Germans have classified not only the transfer of missiles to Ukraine, but also all other equipment, ammunition, and weapons, and given that they have authorized strikes wherever possible, this indicates that they have internally decided that war with Russia is inevitable and that they need to fight. They don't want to fight themselves. They don't want their soldiers to go and fight against Russia. And they have decided that it is necessary to fully supply the Ukrainian soldier with everything needed to destroy or neutralize Russia, rather to neutralize it. I think they are betting on neutralizing Vladimir Putin and his regime. The only question is, how long will it take?
Very interesting piece of news. Today, even on Nastoyaще Vremya, you also showed it. It made its way to a Telegram channel. People will tear you apart with their bare hands. Even the wives themselves will come and tear you apart. That's a quote. A volunteer showed how wounded Russian soldiers on crutches are being kept in the basement of the 5th MSB, naturally to be sent on a deadly assault. The widow of a fallen soldier and volunteer of the Russian World Movement, racist Anna Uvarova, published a video with soldiers, which was provided by members of the 5th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade. And she says that they are planning to liquidate them, dispose of them, just sit and wait until they arrive. No one will be sent back as cargo 200. No one but Putin can stop this. There is a lot of swearing in there. And she said that they are sending racists to the slaughter. And if anything happens, the people will tear you apart with their bare hands. The wives themselves will come and tear you apart. And in general, officials should be the ones dying, not ordinary Russian soldiers. You are taking away our husbands, fathers, children. You are the cattle who should be going ahead of all the guys. But you just sit it out. End of quote. Do you think the people won't rise up? The people will tear you apart with their bare hands. The wives themselves will come and tear you apart. Here's another quote. And is this just a little warning bell that shouldn't be paid any attention to at all? Or is this the beginning of a powerful confrontation in Russia against the Kremlin?
This is not a warning bell. This is nothing. Look, Dasha, there once was a truly important movement during the First Chechen War, when the mothers of conscripts, the mothers of those mobilized, came and demanded that Yeltsin put an end to it. And Yeltsin ended it. Because it was a very strong, unified movement. And back then, Russia was completely different. It was in a half-collapsed, poor, dire state. Something had to be done. And it was clear that such a war that was fought for money, a war that had originally been started by Korzhakov and the security services, was ultimately brought to an end because this particular part of the population, the mothers, rose up, came forward and said, enough. Do you remember when there was a similar story with conscripts? Conscripts were sent to war against Ukraine, and the mothers of the conscripts started to speak out, and Putin immediately gave the order to get the conscripts out and tried to somehow smooth over the situation. They are afraid of this movement. They remember what happened during the First Chechen War. They don't want anything like that to happen again. But when we talk, for example, about an initiative like the Wives of the Mobilized, they banged their pots in the kitchens. And that was the end of it. They went out to the Ministry of Defense a few times. The generals who came out to them told them to shut up. Even the colonels who came out to them did the same. And they fell silent. Nothing will happen in this regard. Why won't it happen? Because on one side, you have these dissatisfied wives of the mobilized whose husbands are being killed. And on the other side, you have the same kind of wives, not of the mobilized, but of those who bought their way out. She got married once, he was killed. She became a widow, got the money. Second time, got the money. Third time, got the money. It's a whole business. It's a whole business. They all get bought off. Do you understand what the point is? It's not just some mobilized person who was grabbed, tied up, sent off, and went to kill. For the most part, these are people who wanted to get money for going to another territory, to a foreign country, and killing someone. They're ready to kill a person for money. They're mercenaries just like Prigozhin, who was killed in the sky over Russia. Exactly the same kind of mercenaries, no different from this cat. The only difference is that cat was getting billions while they get some amount, a few million rubles, which are wiped out by inflation in Russia. They're killers just the same. That's why I don't believe in this whole movement of the wives of the mobilized, that they'll come and do something like that. Only his own elite will remove Putin. Right now, there are probably no conspirators in the Kremlin. But they could appear, they could show up when something collapses, when things start to fall apart. It will be a domino effect. When, as I repeat, there is a blow to the economy, a blow to oil, a blow at the front, and so on. It will all collapse and Putin will be removed. But he understands perfectly well that he has no other way out of this situation except to continue the war. Because as long as he continues the war, Dasha, he can keep resetting everyone and everything. You've already heard once again from Tolstoy in the State Duma that they're planning to reset the constitution again. To rewrite the constitution, which he had already reset back in 2020. They're planning to reset it again, to tighten things even further. And what will follow the resetting of the constitution? Repressions, mass purges. Take Shoigu, for example. I'm 100% sure he's afraid to go out on the streets of Moscow. Did you know he has 14 bodyguards who accompany him?
Yes, I wanted to discuss that with you. Why wasn't he at the parade and why did he suddenly increase his security to the number you mentioned last September or October? What is the reason for this? And the publication wrote that he's afraid of internal enemies.
He's afraid of Putin. He's afraid of Putin. He stole money right under Putin's nose. He didn't share that money. Why did the confrontation arise between Prigozhin, Shoigu, and Gerasimov on the other side? Because of money. I was told the amount was $6 billion. $6 billion. That was the amount. They couldn't split it. A confrontation began, which escalated to the point where Putin had to urgently leave, to flee Moscow. He grabbed his mayonnaise, got on a plane, and flew out because his life was in danger, or at least that's what they thought there, or maybe they just made up that danger for him. Because Prigozhin didn't want to kill Putin. It all just fell on him. He wanted to deal with Shoigu and Gerasimov. Putin had to have Prigozhin killed by Patrushev's hands. The Wall Street Journal wrote about this. It's not my invention that it was Patrushev who killed Prigozhin. Patrushev was sidelined, sent off to deal with ships after that. Shoigu's people were eliminated. 8 out of 10 of Shoigu's deputies are under arrest in prison. One of Shoigu's deputies, the 9th, who was responsible for the money, is missing. Now they want to wipe out, to get rid of Gerasimov because he's also a party to the conflict. And Shoigu walks around having acquired 14 bodyguards. He walks around in fear. And he doesn't just say that he's cold and lonely. Shoigu knows perfectly well that tomorrow he might not wake up. He knows perfectly well that Putin could kill him. There are a huge number of people who want to finally tear apart Shoigu's empire. They've practically torn it apart already, because Shoigu is not just the Ministry of Defense and contracts like those of Timur Ivanov. Shoigu is also the Ministry of Emergency Situations, which he protected, a huge, enormous agency. You understand? Shoigu, yes, that's the Ministry of Defense. Shoigu, yes, that's the contracts. Shoigu, yes, that's all sorts of corrupt schemes. Shoigu is the construction of Patriot Park for 20 billion rubles, which they embezzled. 20 billion rubles that they stole. Shoigu is the procurement and sale of weapons. Shoigu is making money at the front. It's sending drugs to the front, prostitutes to the front, black market weapons that were funneled to terrorists, to the Taliban, and so on. Shoigu was involved in this at the initial stage and made money from it together with Gerasimov and his generals. And he didn't just get those bodyguards for nothing. He understands perfectly well that Putin will take revenge on him for Prigozhin. Putin most likely had to kill Prigozhin. He gave that order. But I think that now he really regrets that he was forced to eliminate a person whom he believed was working very effectively. And he will seek revenge. And Shoigu knows this perfectly well.
So this summer could be decisive for many players connected to Prigozhin and essentially the Russian army.
I think so, yes. Now, Kadyrov started talking. There was some video released about whether he's sick or not. He was also part of this game. He didn't make it there at the time.
I wanted to ask you about Kadyrov. Now he's come out, started talking about life and death, but it's all some kind of philosophical sayings, Sasha. I listened to it. For what purpose? Why? Why all of a sudden?
Listen, I think Kadyrov is simply sending a signal. Just a few weeks ago, maybe a month, there were rumors that Kadyrov would soon be removed. I think they wanted to remove him. He has a huge number of enemies. Yes, Zolotov helps him, the head of the National Guard, former bodyguard of Sobchak, and in a sense, an aide to Putin. But the FSB is against Kadyrov, military intelligence is against Kadyrov, the GRU is against Kadyrov, the Ministry of Defense, the General Staff, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the investigative committee represented by Bastrikin and the prosecutor's office are all against Kadyrov. These are all people who oppose Kadyrov. These are clans that are against Kadyrov. And now they're simply being sent a signal. Well, guys, look. I went to Putin and once again received the right to rule. And there's nothing you can do to me. I think that's more or less how this signal should be interpreted coming from Ramzan Kadyrov. But all those people who, in one way or another, were involved in this conflict with Prigozhin and in the outcome that concerned Prigozhin have either been neutralized, disposed of, or are under constant pressure of some kind. So, yes, the infighting and purges will continue. And Putin's vendetta has not been stopped. It will go on. And he will see it through. He will gradually destroy all of these people.
Sasha, our audience is asking you, since we do these streams together every week, I've noticed they're asking you to give a brief forecast of what might happen this week before our next meeting. What do you think? A short forecast? A mini prediction from top analyst Alexander Demchenko?
I think that Trump is not taking any significant actions regarding Russia, and he himself will try to get out of the war in the near future. The Europeans, obviously, will begin urgently supplying Ukraine with missiles and other long-range munitions to strengthen its position ahead of the summer offensive. I think that a series of sabotage operations will begin in the near future. We will see them in large numbers over the next week or week and a half at railway junctions, tracks, and so on. And it is to be expected, though not in the coming week, but in the longer term, that the drone war will intensify even further, both with regard to Russia and with regard to Ukraine.
Friends, please like this video. Every week I meet with top analyst Alexander Demchenko. This is the Sasha plus Dasha segment. We discuss the key events, and we hope that if a major event suddenly happens, we'll do a special broadcast. But mainly it's once a week. Friends, subscribe to my channel, Dasha Happy. Let me know in the comments what you think about the situation overall, your forecasts, your opinions, your analysis. Alexander Demchenko, top analyst. Sasha, thank you so much and see you soon.
Thank you. See you next time. Bye.